Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dina Fafadra. I'm a director of business and technology within Amazon Business, and I'm super excited about our guests that we've got here today. Over the next half an hour, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the trends and technologies that are revolutionizing the global supply chain, and the ways that business leaders like yourselves are using different emerging technologies to remain agile, resilient, and competitive. If you've been having fun thus far, I promise this next session is going to be just as exhilarating as everything you've seen thus far. As we've heard over the past day or two, organizations are turning to new and more sophisticated solutions to improve their operations and optimize their supply chain from start to finish. But alongside these opportunities come new challenges and disruptions, and we're each kind of facing this in our own ways. But to tackle these challenges, our time together today, we're going to focus on three things. First, how did we get to where we're at today? Next, what are we going to do to improve the supply chain, revolutionize procurement, and differentiate our businesses? And finally, where will procurement and the global supply chain take us in the future? The bottom line is, today's fast-changing landscape is anything but stagnant. And our ability to stay afloat rests on how quickly and effectively we incorporate new technologies, as well as our ability to think both about our short-term needs as well as our long-term goals. So I'm excited to be joined on stage by our VP of Technology, Gelaye, who's going to talk to us about this. Let's welcome her on stage.
Thank you.
Please have a seat.
Yes.
All right, I love this. I get to put her in the hot seat, and we get to have a little conversation here with all of you guys. Well, before I get into the questions that I have that I think everyone would want to know, maybe you could take a minute, introduce yourself in your own words, and tell us about you.
Well, first of all, it's super exciting to be here with you all. My name is Gelaye. My name is a little different. I was actually born in East Africa, in Ethiopia. I was born in the middle of a war, which is great preparation for supply chain discussions. So I think it's going to be a great conversation today. Just a couple of things, my journey to Amazon. For much of my journey, I was sitting on the other side of the stage. I was leading technology companies where I was building my own supply chain for new technology that I was releasing into the market, or I was the corporate CIO for aerospace and defense companies. So my career has largely put me on the buying side of this conversation. So I can imagine, experiencing all the things that we experience and making those decisions, how important it is to have a strong partner, supply chain resiliency, and the agility that you need to scale your businesses. So wonderful to be here with you today.
That's awesome. Well, I've got some questions related to global supply chain, but I also would love to get to know you a little bit better. So if I might ask a slightly more personal question, we're all Amazon shoppers. I hope you are.
Yeah.
What was the last thing you bought on Amazon?
Okay, this is TMI, but the reality is, while Stephanie were on stage, I was trying to buy Stephanie's shoes. Did you guys check out those animal print shoes? They were like everything. So I was looking for those on Amazon. That was my last attempt.
Well, you've got great shoes, but they would go good with the outfit too.
Thank you.
Don't ask me what I last bought, but anyhow, well, that's great to hear. Could you tell us a little bit about your team and what you do at Amazon?
Yeah, so in my role, I have a fairly large technical team, 6,000 plus employees. We actually are responsible for the compute technology across all of the Amazon fulfillment network globally. So that entails, we service 1 million end users, thousands of sites globally, 20 countries of operations, and we do about $1 billion worth of buying every year. So just a really, really critical backbone team for Amazon. We're Amazon to Amazon, so to speak.
That's amazing. That's got to be a little bit hard sometimes. But it makes me wonder, as we reflect on the last few years with the COVID-19 pandemic and remote work, what have we learned from that as it relates to the supply chain?
Yeah, super important question. And I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment and just pause to thank you all for the absolute resiliency and agility that you showed during the COVID-19 crisis. I think a couple of things that we learned were just how important it is to have a supply chain that's resilient and adaptable. We saw things like stockouts, we saw things like long lead times and fulfillment. We saw a lot of tremendous challenges, and what it really showed us is that we needed to build in resiliency, agility, and even security into our supply chain. Now, those lessons that we learned during COVID-19 are lessons that we actually want to keep long into the future. I think it gave us an opportunity to really think about the fact that how can we infuse automation and digitization into our supply chain, all the way from the beginning when we're planning and forecasting, all the way till the end in terms of our end user and customer deliveries. So while COVID was a really difficult period, it made it clear to us that we need to make data-informed decisions and that those decisions need to be dynamic and responsive to the context in which we were operating. And it actually set the stage for artificial intelligence and machine learning and the future that we're all designing today. And then the only last thing I'd say is it just speaks to the importance of partnerships, because you're only as good as your partnerships in your ecosystem of suppliers and partners, and even your relationship with your customers. So I think those are all great lessons to take long into the future.
Yeah, it also kind of teaches us the fragility of our supply chain.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, one of the things that we ended up doing as a result of our learnings is just diversifying our supply chain. We took on the position of being prime for some of our distribution and our own inventory management systems. And then we diversified by 60% our supply chain. So coming out of COVID, we have a much more diverse supply chain with optionality.
That's great.
Yep.
Any other examples of seeing that resiliency?
Yeah. I mean, you may or may not know that when we go through peak at Amazon, it's a period where we hyperscale our fulfillment capabilities, and yet we still want to meet promises in terms of on-time delivery at speed to our customers. So we really have to plan for that level of scale up, but also precision in terms of the right stock at the right locations. So all of that was part of our planning and our anticipation. And I think the infrastructure that we built, the process infrastructure, the mechanisms that we built, are durable and sustainable to really attack fragility.
One of the examples that you've talked about before is the digital supply chain.
Yeah.
Could you maybe share a bit more with the audience?
Sure, I'd love to. So, one of the things that we realized is that we needed to really kind of take a step back and look at all of the processes that we had, because we want to create efficiency for our customers, but also for our own teams, our purchasing teams. So we built a platform called the Digital Supply Chain. It's a single integrated platform all the way from supplier forecasting to procurement to inventory management to distribution to our end user nodal sites. And in addition to that platform, we wanted to add things like robotic process automation. And robotic process automation allows us to reduce the workload on our purchasing teams so that they can actually be proactive and planful and not be drained into the administrative exercises of trying to create a purchase order. So we were able to eliminate a lot of defects. We were able to improve our on-time delivery rates to 98% or greater and just continue to perform at a high bar while scaling our organization. And all of that was driven by this digital transformation that we began during COVID and that we're continuing to enjoy.
And tools like this also enable you to track real time as well, right? And that's a huge benefit to you.
Real time and with our suppliers. So being able to really have tight integration with our supply base so that we have predictability and precision in our planning. And dynamic, communication. I think that's really important. And it also is an Excel buster. I don't know about you guys, but every time that I would see Excel come out in meetings, it would always make me very nervous because that data is going to be nascent or out of date. And so now we really have real-time data and real-time analytics to make better decisions.
Yeah, I don't know about anyone here, but have you ever deleted something accidentally in Excel? And it sounds like that problem would not happen if we're...
There's no way back from that, yeah.
That's great. I think tools like that get us very excited, and I'm wondering if there's other tools that, besides the digital supply chain and the robotics automation, that you're excited about right now.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm like a kid in a candy store. I think there's so many things to be excited about, but let's start with the foundation of wanting traceability and wanting transparency in our supply chain. So there's technologies that are becoming more readily available, like RFID, QR codes, where we can actually trace assets and technology from supplier all the way to the end customer consumption of that. So that closed loop is really, really compelling and powerful, and it makes us more cost effective, so we're not overbuying beyond what our demand signals are. Of course, I have to say robotics. Robotics is just a tremendous opportunity to really drive more efficiency, more control, and more predictability, and also reduce safety risks to our human associates. So more and more exciting things coming in the field of robotics. And then long term, as we think about like this fully integrated supply chain, where we're able to actually, respond to disruption with a lot more data and insight and intelligence. All of those things compound to really create a future-proof supply base that will benefit our customers and keep us efficient, cost-effective, and high quality in terms of our precision for our customers.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like having the visibility to every point in the supply chain allows you to fix problems.
That's right.
Before they occur.
Yeah, I think the notion that you're going to have perfection and there's not going to be real-world challenges is kind of naive at best. So what we really focus on is like, how do we respond? Mm-hmm. How do we predict those problems and self-cure, or how do we respond so that we can protect our promises to our end customers? And I'm sure that you all contend with that in the work that you're doing. So I think that the investment in automation for us has been a huge differential. And I presume it would be for any industry that we're in.
Makes complete sense. Well then, if you think about the overall supply chain ecosystem, what's changing?
I think there's a couple of things. One is I think that it's becoming more complex. I mean, moving goods and services across borders has become more complex. I know we've got some time on the agenda to talk about some of those things, and digitization has a role to play in that. I think that there's also the need to build supply chains that are resilient. So that resiliency goes all the way upstream. I talk about shifting left in terms of visibility. So are our suppliers also diversified? Do they have contingency plans? Do they have resiliency plans in place? And how do we have tighter and tighter planning with those suppliers so that we're actually really kind of on the same side of the table in our decision making? I think another thing to really think about is just the fact that our customers are also changing in terms of their needs and expectations. Most of our customers are scaling. They need to know that they have predictability in our ability to respond to their scaling needs. And so we also want to shift right in terms of more and more integration with our customers. So it's both shifting left and shifting right and creating this closed loop cycle that's really informed by data for better decisions. And just philosophically, data is not for data's sake, it's for precision and decisions. And so how do we take all this data that we've consumed and created and start to recognize patterns in the data that allow us to be better planners?
Yeah. Is there, if you could use an example within Amazon stores of how we use this data and some of the digital integrations.
Yep. Well, I mean, we look at things like some of our technology. We look for failure modes, and we look for prediction of those failure modes so we can self-heal before there's failure. So the idea being that, it's very easy to send replacement goods out to our field sites, but wouldn't it be great if we could predict the moment before they needed a replacement so we have goods on their way? And so that's all been enabled by having this fully integrated digital supply chain and putting in what we call telemetry or metrics that allow us to really anticipate the needs of our customers.
Yeah, it sounds like a tremendous improvement in the forecasting and planning process.
Yeah, look, we're in early days. I've got really high expectations, and so I think we're starting to see some of the gains, but I think there's far more ahead of us for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's kind of one of Amazon's true value propositions here is how they're able to do that
Right.
in a better way and predict ahead of an issue occurring.
Yeah. You know, I jokingly say, like, from an Amazon perspective, we're like, you know, persistently self-critical around whether we've nailed it. And I think that mindset comes into the way in which we leverage data to really continue to challenge ourselves to say, have we thought about all the scenarios and have we planned for all of them, both the upside and the downside scenarios? And so that may be something that you know, we're obsessed with from an Amazonian perspective, but I think it serves our customers well.
Well, let's shift gears because we talked a lot about planning and thinking about the future. And as I think about the future, I want to talk about the hard things that sometimes we push out and we're like, well, we'll take care of this later. And I think the hard thing that I don't want to push out later is let's talk about sustainability and the future of sustainability. And let's talk about how we do the hard things.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's important that you said the hard things because it is hard. You know, sustainability is the outcome of decisions that were made upstream. And so what we want to do is you know, I think Candy Caspary spoke about, you know, how we think about inclusion and talked about, you know, born-in inclusion. Well, we want to design born-in sustainability in our supply chain. So as we think about choosing our suppliers and choosing our assets, we think about the sustainability up front, so that once we've designed that into our supply base, we're already gaining ground in our eco goals and our objectives. So a good example of that is when we look at things like battery technology, we look at consumption of energy, we design that up front into our supply base, and then we can use things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to ferret out where we have more opportunities to buy some of those greener assets and greener choices, and then we can automatically push those demand signals into our forecasting. So I think it's this idea that you're going to have the sustainability that you've built in, that you've born into your supply base, and your partners, one of the ways to choose your partners are their commitment to sustainability. And the good news about Amazon is because we're a volume buyer, you know, where we go, our suppliers will go. So as we're requiring that level of focus on sustainability, you know, we're benefiting from that, and you as customers are benefiting from that as well.
You know, you mentioned AI in here, and I think there's a lot of people in the room that would probably share the opinion that it's kind of intimidating to think about AI. Yeah. And I'd want your opinion on, you know, how are you thinking about it? How is it relevant for the broader audience? And can we touch on AI a bit?
Yeah, so it's super fair to feel intimidated by it because I think there's been a ton of hype, and that hype has, it seems, seemingly come from out of nowhere. But the reality is that we've been working on machine learning and AI for decades. You know, so much of Amazon's experience is informed by AI and ML. So if you're a buyer, you've been using AI and ML on the Amazon platform, the e-commerce platform, for decades. But as data owners, and all of your data owners, you know, you have this treasure trove of data that you've been, you know, aggregating for decades in all of your, you know, kind of past buying decisions. So the big idea with AI and ML is to take that data and infer what are the patterns in the data, what's the story in the data, and then how do we use that story in the data to predict what the next, you know, kind of outcome is going to be. So I think that it's important for you to understand you have the data, you got it. It's about applying this kind of algorithm thinking to the data, and then letting that inform your decisions. You know, I spent a lot of my career building those kinds of systems in healthcare. And healthcare is an industry where there's tons of data, and the data is complex. But some simple things like natural language processing that is able to take you know, data and then actually abstract it into a natural language processing, and then allow you to really kind of predict the next text that's going to come. You know, that's been used for over decades in the healthcare industry. So I would say to you guys, don't be intimidated by it, but, you know, like in most good things, you want to design the future that you most want. So be a participant in the journey. Be co-creators with your partners. Certainly if you're in this room, you're already partnered with a company that's very committed to AI and ML. We have the cloud capability. We've got a ton of capability in our technology, and we use these technologies to be better partners to each of you. So you're already participating in the model, and I think there's many more ways that we can co-innovate together as we go into the future. And so hopefully it's not as intimidating as it sounds.
That sounds right. You make it sound a lot easier.
That's my job.
That's great. One of the things I also want to tie back to the discussion that occurred yesterday with Aster and Alex was going to leadership principles, and this is maybe more of just getting to know you better.
Yeah.
Could you share with us your favorite leadership principle as you've been at Amazon now a couple of years, and maybe give some parting thoughts on that?
It's like choosing a child. I kind of
but you have a favorite one.
There's a couple I'm going to just lean in on. Learn and be curious. This one is so profoundly important because we're in a world that is highly dynamically evolving. And so the rate of new ideas, new opportunities to lean in and to explore innovation, it's just exponential. So learn and be curious is really this idea that you're evergreen, you're ever learning, you're ever curious, and you're ever questioning the foundational principles of the decisions that you've made. I think that's just such a powerful one. And as supply chain leaders, you are obviously well positioned to learn and be curious in every decision that you make. And your suppliers, the best suppliers, are going to help you learn and make you more curious. And that leads me to one that I think is like the safety valve for everything, which is insist on the highest standard. Look, I think that we are in a world where we need to insist on the highest standard. You need partners that you can really trust, that show up in the ways that you need them to show up, that anticipate what you need, and that they're working on your future well before you're asking them to work on your future. So insist on the highest standard. As a new Amazonian, I can tell you it's just super real in our culture, and it's super powerful. And think about being on a team where everybody is insisting on the highest standard. Like, that's pretty awesome.
I love this leadership principle that says we operate sometimes on our gut, and what we sometimes we don't have time in how we make decisions, and you've just got to know the right thing. And that's kind of based on your experience and the data that you've seen and your history and your learning. So it's kind of a culmination of having done all of the other leadership principles well to say when you are put into a certain situation, you're able to make the right gut decision. I also find it's the one that I can't teach anyone on my team. So it's the one I look for the most in the people I work with, because I think you innately just have it.
Dina, I love that one so much. And what's so beautiful is that's a good criteria for choosing your partners too. Are they right a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they chose us, right, in return, so they must be right. Hey, well, thank you. Thank you for your time, and it was a pleasure talking to you. Let's hand it for Mamar.